Today with me is Kashif-ul-Huda, the founding editor of twocircles.net, and we will talk to him about the journey of the TCN in particular, but about community media in general. And we will, in this interview, we hope to have a more detailed conversation, and edited part of this we may upload. Beginning with you, Kashif bhai, like you are not professionally, you have never been a journalist or a media professional, like you're not trained to be. So how did you come to this?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of stumbled upon this journalism. It's not like I wanted to do this. The reason we did it was there was a gap between so-called mainstream media, their coverage of Muslims, and Muslims themselves covering, the community. So I saw there's a huge gap between how it was done, like a stereotype and very sparse coverage and very, fixed issues that they will cover versus community media, which was really under-resourced and also focus more on opinion pieces and all that you can do it from the office rather than actually going to the field. So there was a big gap there. And being an outsider, maybe that gave me the perspective that, yes, I can do things differently because I wasn't trained, right? So I don't know the rules. So I can, I can do pretty much anything I wanted. So I think that having that ability, there was no constraints on me or how I want to do it and how it should be done. And we just kind of did it by learning it. So it was a great experience and I think not being an outsider, I think helped us covering the media, covering Muslim community better.
So you started with other portals also. I think Urdustan was one, and there were some other portals which led to finally the culmination was TCN, I guess.
Yeah, Urdustan was different. Urdustan comes from my love of Urdu. Urdu is my first love, so I still love Urdu, and I was doing it. And Urdustan is launched in '96 or '97. It's been a while, and it was actually bringing Urdu community online. There was not much at that time, not many people. So it just also brought Indians and Pakistanis together. So Urdu just kind of, more on the creative side of things, and I enjoyed it. But then Gujarat genocide of 2002 happened, and then I started thinking more about, how can we do things for Muslims back in India? Because I've suffered through it. In Jamshedpur 1979, I was a kid. Then in '92 Lucknow, I was there. So I feel like, every 10 years, the Muslim community has to suffer through this. So it's like, okay, how can we make it better or what can we do? So I changed my thing and then I dropped Kurdistan and started doing this. Initially, it was IndianMuslims.info because I also saw there was a big gap in information about Muslims, data about Muslims. This is before Sachar committee, and I used to go to different university libraries and collect information. But IndianMuslims.info, again, as I'm not a trained journalist, I had no intention of doing that, and I was actually subscribing to all these Muslim publications to support them. But I after watching them for a few years, I was like, you know what, I maybe have to do something. So I did it.
So you said how mainstream media often, or even Muslim journalists, ended up doing stereotypical stories, and so you thought of starting TCN. So how do you think TCN was different? And in that context, how what are you think been TCN achievements?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here, and one thing I, of course, started as a community media, but also keep in mind, and this is what a lot of people who interview me, journalists or professors, they kind of miss out, is also the timeline. That's the time when the internet journalism is taking over, right? So as you mentioned, I've already done, by that time, I've been on the online since 1995. So I have seen a lot. I understood internet better, right? And so when this was happening, I also, I'm trying to understand journalism, but I understand the medium a lot, right? Versus a lot of trained journalists in India, right? Early 2000s, very few actually had websites. So, for example, The Hindu was one of the first ones to have a website. But what they will do until recently was they will publish or write for the print and they put it on the website, right? But the website is a different medium, right? It's a different communication style. So for us, of course, we're also trying to how to cover community media, but also how to do internal journalism. So in that aspect, I think sometimes they misses out on how TCN did the internal journalism. So that's one thing. Second is how to do community media, right? So what does that mean? So let's take an example of something, how Muslims portray themselves, right? So you can't replace a bad stereotype with good stereotype. What does that mean? So mainstream media will say, oh, Muslims are bad, Muslims are backwards, Muslims are violent people, versus you will say, oh, no, look, this Muslim guy, he is doing amazing work and he's peaceful and all that, right? So I said, sure, you will try to balance it, but then you are also being not honest in what else is in the community, right? You're trying to portray the best people in the community, which is fine. We did it as a TCN positive. We also want to bring in role models, but also like what is there? So we have to be critical of community leaders and organizations. When I say critical, it means critiquing them and their work in an honest way, right? Media is a watchdog, right, for the community, for the society. So we played that role. So, for example, all the Muslim organizations, we did good stories about them, but we also critical stories about them, right? So Zakir Naik is a famous example. We covered his peace conference that he used to do, but also wrote pieces about critiquing him from different angles, like, in what ways things are problematic and all that. And one thing also, this is something that people think a lot, that Muslim communities is always critical of. If you write something, they will boycott you or something like that. None of that happened, actually, because, again, we're coming from an honest place. We were concerned about the community, and community needs a space where they can come and debate these issues honestly and safely, right? When a so-called mainstream or the corporate media critique it, if Mr. Gupta from Shekhar Gupta writes about the community, of course, even if he's honest, which in most cases he's not, the reaction will be negative, versus somebody from the community in a community space coming and so I think TCN did that a lot. But one thing I'll keep going back to do that, which the tweet that you said about Zateo is, opinion pieces are fine, but I realize when you are doing fact checking, or you are critiquing an opinion piece, or critiquing something that a big publication has done, the agenda is already set by somebody else. Now, I come from a science background, right? So if the data is faulty, no matter how you analyze it, your analysis is going to be faulty. If somebody has left out an important piece of data, and you don't know about it, then that's it. You can continue to say, oh, no, he's not terrorist. But, so what we did, we sent people, on the field, right? So if somebody says, oh, the national media or the police is saying he's a terrorist, we'll send somebody to his location, his village, and say, okay, interview the family, but also interview the neighbors. So we find out like completely different picture, right? So that's it. This is basic journalism. Journalism 101. Like, you don't report from Delhi. Go out and meet people and bring their stories. And I think that was the critical success for TCN, is that sending reporters on the field, even though we were under-resourced, underutilized, but by sending that, we were able to change the narrative, right? One good example is Forbesganj. Forbesganj police firing that happened, I can't remember the year. There's a place in Bihar, for those who don't know. The Patna media was reporting, oh, there was a cross-firing, and whatever, and there was a famous Muslim bureaucrat who was actually speaking on behalf of the government, and say, oh, yeah, there was a cross-firing, and then, we fired 4 shots and 3 people are dead. But when we send reporters there, this completely different picture emerged, right? And then we were able to interview and document, and then run a series on it. And then, the whole narrative changed. Even the organizations in Patna were also not sending their people to do fact finding. And then, ultimately it got picked up by national media in Delhi. Again, very under-resourced, but by consistent and honest reporting, you are able to change the narrative, right? So that's what we want to do. If we were just critical of this, which was the question I asked, like, how can Bihar police be so efficient that they fire 4 shots and kill 3 people? It makes no sense, right? You fire only 4 and you kill 3, right? It's so. But the question emerged from that. But instead of just critiquing that, now you go back and you actually find the reports and go there and talk to people and see what's really happening. So that, I think we did the field reporting. Second thing is also not portraying community as a monolith, right? There's a lot of variation in the community. As I said, there's not replacing a bad stereotype with good stereotype. Like whatever is happening in the community, we honestly reported that. I think that was important. Also, not taking Muslim community as a religious community. Now, what I mean by that are 2 things. One is that Two Circles were not an Islamic website. We were not trying to convert somebody to Islam. We're not trying to preach Islam or how great the religion is. I was more interested in how people, as a social, cultural community living, and which is also then what happens then we had reporters in Kerala, we had reporters in Assam. Like, when we say Indian Muslim, it's like Urdu speaking UP, Bihar, Delhi, right? But there's so many variations. You are based in Calcutta. Your family is Urdu speaking, right? So that's also something there. But then there are Bengali speaking Muslims within West Bengal. So covering all that, the variations in the community. So that was also, I think TCN did a good job of bringing that so-called community together. Right, it's many communities, but now we have reported in Kerala, and then they are reporting on what's happening in Kerala. So all of a sudden, somebody from Bihar reading in English are able to connect and see, okay, what's happening there? What's good things happening in this community, in this region? How can we adopt that? So, we were, again, honest about it. When we didn't have an agenda. Our agenda was simple, which was cover Indian Muslim stories, however it is. We didn't define who's a Muslim. We didn't say, anybody who's there. And we honestly reported on cultural and less on religion, because I was, when talking about religion, I think the community aspect of it get diminished. So we talked more about, the cultural aspect, the political aspect, social aspect of it, economic as well. So that's what I think, few things that we got it right. And it's not like we planned it. It's not like I had it was an evolution while doing it. Yeah.
So those are some of the positive sides of or the successes of TCN you mentioned. TCN positive you mentioned. You also mentioned about the diversity, but somehow lot of traction that TCN stories got were related to terrorism. So do you want to say something about that? Because in earlier interviews, you have said that, I think you have mentioned about how you, in a way, taught mainstream media to cover Muslim stories in general, but also stories related to terror, like terror in broadly, I'm saying terrorism and any story related to it. Do you want to add
Yeah,
something?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think at that time, at least, we were the early on internet journalism. So I think not just covering Muslim media, I think we also taught early those journalists who were early on, coming on internet. They kind of an example of what internet, what are the possibilities of internet, right? So a lot of famous journalists now have their own website, but how did they start, right? After they got fired from the job or left the job, they started doing the website because they saw a potential there. So even with the websites, few things, I'm going to come back to your question, but a few things we got it right. One was that we made it nonprofit. And I completely believe the only way to do honest journalism is nonprofit. It's not possible to do for profit, because then you're always looking at the bottom line, returning money back to the shareholders, and then the commercial aspect of things. So it's just kind of interest is not journalism is not a mission; it becomes a business. See what happened to NDTV, right? I understand the challenge of raising funds, and journalism is expensive things. But then, it keeps your agenda on it. So I think that was important that we got nonprofit there. The second aspect is not trying to be a complete newspaper, right? So earlier people used to like, oh, we're going to do sports, we're going to do economics, we're going to do, just like a full newspaper. That's a very old fashioned way of doing things. So it was also a learning experience for us as well, because like, no, we were just going to do is niche reporting, which I think now people are picking up, like, okay, we're just going to do technical. So websites are specializing on that. I think so that's we got that right. I think the third thing is also distributed model, right? So the old model, like, oh, we're gonna have big newsroom, we're gonna have early morning meeting, what to publish later in the day before the deadline, and then early morning, everybody next day they will read the thing. So it's still, I think people are still kind of thinking about it. You know, a lot of publications still have big newsrooms. I understand newsrooms has its own charm, but it's also old way of looking things. So as you know, because we we didn't have funds to have a lot of offices or things like that. So everybody working from home, laptop, and traveling, right? So keeping things light and nimble. And I
And
think the third part, I think a lot of, because they come from established publications and old ways of thinking. I think these publications I'm talking about, the websites, they still have big offices and newsrooms and things like that. So I think those three things are critical for our success. We got it right. In terms of covering Muslim stories, yeah. So one of the early ones, so the switch from IndianMuslims.info to TwoCircles.net happened. There was a train bombing in Bombay in 2006, right? So what happened is, of course, a lot of people were dead, including Muslims in there. But the narrative, dominant narrative at that time was also, oh, Muslims don't criticize terrorism, right? What does that mean? It means that you are supporting terrorism. So first of all, Muslims are the average citizen of India. If there's a public bombing, there's a chance, there's likelihood that a Muslim is going to be killed too, right? So why would, as a community, support that, right? It makes no sense to that. So all I did there, and this is, I'm talking about, this perception was even amongst the so-called Muslims, mainstream journalists. And what I did there was I compiled all the statements from different Muslim organizations and individuals critiquing that. That's it. And it was always there. Like, why would Muslims not criticize? Why Jamiyat Ulama Hind or Jamaat Islami not criticize it? It makes no sense. But one thing, they were writing in Urdu mostly, right? And then even if it get published, it will get published in Urdu newspapers. Nobody reads it. And second, English publication, even if they send it, they will not publish it, right? Because it doesn't go with their idea of what Muslim community should be doing there. So there was a lot of gatekeeping happening. There's information that's not going out. So what I did was just compile all that into one, and it was published. And it got a lot of traffic. A lot of people were sharing this, because all of a sudden, again, this, I did nothing. It was all public information that I collected and put it together. So that made me think that, there is a space for this kind of thing, because at that time I was still debating whether this is viable. And again, I'm not a journalist, so like, what do I need to do here? Um, so then again, we start covering Muslim community, but then terrorism becomes a big issue. At that time, a lot of our youths were getting arrested for, and then media will say, oh, these are terrorists, and a lot of stuff that was happening. And again, we have no idea how to do it, because, this is also critical, because as soon as you say, oh, no, he's not a terrorist, like, oh, you're international, you're supporting terrorism. So we have to be very careful about doing that. So same thing, we just be honest about it, went to the families, went to the other side and say, what is the story here? And then we also started realizing that there were a lot of Muslim kids who were getting released after, this has been happening before, but nobody was talking about it. After 10 years, 5 years, 6 years, Muhammad Amir, 14 years, right? We didn't even know. So these kind of stuff we started reporting back as like, oh, what's going on? And just documenting all that. And then we realized it's a national level phenomenon, right? So it's actually, if you search terror tales on Two Circles, you will find all these stories, and we kind of, how we did that. So at that time, it was a dominant story for us. And but we also covered other issues as well, so not just this. And but that was a dominant narrative at that time. We had to challenge that. We have to see what we can do there.
so, in your earlier interviews, you have mentioned this, and I can vouch as someone who has worked with you and for TCS, that you gave the space and the freedom to your reporters to do stories, to and to, of course, go to field and file, and you did not really gatekeep these stories. So of course, those were your some of the achievements. Yeah, as you mentioned, in many ways, TCN was pioneer, not just in India, but maybe if it started in 2005-6, then internationally also as a community journalist and focusing on niche rather than trying to cover every beat. Uh, and also you mentioned about this work from home system, which post-pandemic became a norm. And in fact, it is still being practiced by many online media. I know for Wire, for different, and if not in Delhi, in other towns, most of their reporters work from home. So yes, so there are so many things in which TCN and under your leadership have been pioneers and setting new norms. But then what went wrong? Why? Like I'm not surprised if someone say today, if I mention about TCN, there are many young kids who maybe don't even know, and it has been my experience that say 2012, 13, 14, anyone who keeps eye on Indian Muslims, be it political scientists, be it sociologists, be it journalists, or even as we understand intelligence agencies, uh, did regularly follow TCL. What went wrong, and if you could say like sort of time when you think, okay, from this was the turning point, since when TCN started downhill.
No, I mean it was always a challenge to run an organization because this wasn't my profession, right? I had a full-time job, I had a family, so I had to manage this. But I was passionate about it. But I also started kind of drifting away with two reasons. One is that um, the time was changing and I needed more resources to be. For me, it was not just, I wasn't doing journalism for awards or anything, right? I was doing it so to make an impact for me. And still a lot of journalists still have problem with that. Journalism was a tool of activism for me, right? But with the agenda defined, right? So agenda defined was just Muslim community. Whatever the community wants should be projected and all that. It wasn't like I want a certain things done. I just wanted to have an impact, right? And we did a lot of impact. As you mentioned, you used to work there. A lot of other kids worked there. Some of them had no journalism background at all, right? We had people from Hindi medium school, Urdu medium, Madrasa school, Darul Deoband. They were working, writing in English, and they got trained and they did it. Some of them, as you know, ended up working for national and international newspapers and stuff like that. I wanted that training, hands-on training. So it was like that. Um, so so what went wrong? First of all, yeah. So I think the impact that I continue to want to make, resource was not available, right? I wasn't that famous. The community, I mean, these people, some famous journalists, they will come lose their job, and within a few months they will start a publication online, and all of a sudden they have more people following them than us because obviously they are famous. They have access to more people and organization to get the funding. So I realized that this was happening. Second thing is, I was in the U.S. and this is where I'm based. It gives some clarity. Distance gives you some clarity, but also I feel like I don't know what's happening in the community. The reason I let my reporters decide what to report is because you are closer to the community, right? So you know what's happening on the ground. So I have to depend on you to tell you like what is the community feeling. But also I used to visit India every year to kind of like make sure that I'm grounded. I know what's happening. And also to retrain myself because I grew up in Bihar and UP. So I used to go to different states to kind of see what's going on. So we went to Kerala, Gujarat, Bengal, UP multiple times just to kind of understand what's happening on the ground. So I kind of started losing interest as well because the things as the political climate was changing. I was like, I didn't feel like India was home for me anymore. So I had no desire to visit India. So I just kind of like start drifting apart from India. So that's one reason. And I was like, if I'm not paying as much attention to India, there's no reason for me to be in charge of something covering Indian Muslim stories when I don't know what's really happening because I felt like India was moving really fast, and then I can't keep up with this because again, I have a job as well to earn my living. So that's I think those were the two reasons. But the third reason is also I don't believe in organizations that are started by a strong personality and they are run only by the weight of that personality. So that person dies, the organization dies with them. So I don't think that's a good leadership quality. A good leader should always be working on the next leadership, training them and taking over, right? So which I pride myself, and I think consider you, Muhammad Ali, Raqib, all these wonderful people done amazing job, and this leader. It doesn't have to be part of the organization, but it's train and that. So that's one of the reason I was burned out also doing this day in and day out is it can take its toll. So I wanted to kind of hand over this leadership to the next generation. Um, and so I mean, TCN, it's been, I don't know how many years, I think 4 or 5 years since I left. It still survives. I think they have to figure out. And another reason to leave the leadership is I wanted the next generation to take over and do journalism for this time. What TCN did was right for its time, but I think the organization has to evolve. And I cannot continue doing the old thing and hoping that it will work in the new environment. So media landscape is very crowded. Everybody is asking for attention. And it has changed from written text to more, pictures and videos, right? Short form videos is popular through TikTok, Instagram stories. So I think that's where the need leadership has to emerge to say, okay, what will work in this time, right? So that's another aspect of Two Circles, the technical aspect and the journalism or storytelling. Usually, people don't explore that option. It's like, oh, community media, that's fine, but also we were exploring the new media. The reason it worked was it's actually suited the internet thing. If you are writing as if it was written for print, it's not going to work online, right? So online things are a little bit more attention grabbing, but not clickbait. We didn't do clickbait. I hate that. But also you don't have to write long text, and also there's no word limit, right? Reports will say, oh, what is the word limit? I'm like, no, as long as the story is gripping, you can write well. People will read it, even if it's 10,000 words. But don't write 10,000 to fill a space. If you can tell a story in 1,000 and a picture, that's it. That's totally fine. And some of that we did that. Sometimes there's a small brief intro and then there's a video. There's nothing else. So we were kind of playing with these things. So I think nothing went wrong. Again, it's like the organization has to evolve. I think the other aspect of TCN as the training aspect, taking, I keep saying kids because, I'm old, young people from the community and giving them a space to do things, learn, and report on community. So that has continued. I think they started the Seed Fellowship, which a lot of, I think they have gone through a few versions of that. And again, so I think the mission can continue. They can also change. The organization can also change into not doing reporting, just doing training. That's fine too. But I don't want to be in the middle of that. I want, the new
Can,
leadership, the community
can I
kind of
come in
comes.
here?
Yes, sure.
So sorry to interrupt. So the way I look at it, one of my friends, he did his PhD on Hindi media, and he interviewed. I'm forgetting his name, very famous, but the former editor of Jansatta. He died now, and he said a very good thing to him during his field work that uh, good editors don't just like you don't make good editors. Good editors are made by good management. So somewhere I like when I look at TC, like I'm more like insider outsider for TCN now, and so I felt two things happened almost simultaneously. Uh, is a besides of course that the political changing environment you said when I feel that TCN is needed even more or this kind of media is that the you sidestepping and the new team taking over, which I felt was not probably as connected to India and Indian like ground realities, and B, the new competitions which came up, like there were Wire, this is the period 12-13 when Scroll, Wire, and other portals, and also like so-called Muslim portals like Muslim Mirror, India Tomorrow, later Maktub, all these came up. So
Right.
if you could just give your first take on this, like how you, like I feel that TCN couldn't cope up with the competitions.
No, there was. I still believe there's no competition. Certain hubris in that, but I think because that's why I'm also surprised, but not surprised in Mehdi Hassan's venture Zetio, because my critique of Muslim portals is mostly still covering negative stories. And they, if you critique them, they'll say, oh, yeah, it's documentation, this is happening. Sure. But, we were very thoughtful about our coverage. So two things, right? So our audience were Muslims primarily, but also people who are interested in Muslim. So if Muslims youth are reading it and you just see negative stories about yourself, what is the impression you're saying, right? So when you say community media, we were responsible for the community, right? We were watchdog, but I cannot just continue feeding you negative stories and expect you to be in a healthy mental health where you can achieve certain things, right? So how do we do that? So yes, negative things are happening. We're not shying away from negative things, but what are you emphasizing, right? So negative stories, but then as you remember, Nivedita actually, we were doing that positive story, but she like, let's do it every
Edit.
week, once a week, and just kind of made it big. So that was her contribution, and she did a wonderful job there. Um, so, for example, I'll give you an example where there was a famine like situation in West Bengal, and I'm kind of forgetting the name of that place. So it's just like there's nothing positive there. You have to report on what's going on. It's a dire situation. So it was Mumtaz who was there. So let's do it. Honest reporting. What's the situation is pretty bad. Government is responsible. Community is responsible. But like, how do we end on a positive note? Because you cannot just leave it there like this is it. So we ended the series with talking about the organizations that are providing help there, right? So you talk about it, documenting it honestly, but like, how do we there are ways of people to kind of engage in a positive way. Same thing, you're covering lynching, but now what is the purpose of lynching? Is to terrorize the community, right? Why else would somebody record lynching it purposely, right? So they want to be famous, and the more you talk about it, more famous they become. And it also creates an environment where they're copycats. Now they can say, oh yeah, I can do it too. I can become famous too. There's no repercussions. So then what you got to be smart about these things, right? So if you're just documenting it and just like negative for the community, positive for those who are doing it, and then you continue doing, you create a cycle, an environment where just continue doing this, there's nothing happening. So we have to be smart about it. We again, somebody else's agenda. They do the lynching, they set the agenda, and you're reporting back, right? Same thing with fact finding. I'm also not a big fan of fact finding because sure, it's a hard job and people are doing amazing work there, but like, what is the purpose? They will just move on and report something, and you continue chasing this thing that never ends, right? So instead, I was always in like, I want to set my own agenda, which we did, right? So sent people there, and then realize that these organizations, national and international, like, hey, yeah, we want to do a follow-up on that. Great, that's fine. So the impact was bigger than TCN always, right? So if we did a story and then BBC and Al Jazeera follows it, a lot more people are seeing it. And, especially Indian media was terrible in giving us credit. That's fine. Because again, we're not making money. As long as our voices, our stories are getting out there, if people are learning how to do Muslim stories without the negative angle, without the backwardness and all that, that was great. So again, I don't believe anything went wrong. It's just that, and again, I don't think there's a competition because I see them. Not as frequently, but sometimes I'll just go there and see what they're reporting on. It's just, usual stuff. Opinion pieces, no field reporting. Again, I know I understuff, but do one report, but do it well. Instead of like, you don't have to churn out daily, right? You just send one reporter somewhere, and this is again, there's no secret here. I'm happy to consult with them, happy to send them ideas. on how to do it. So how do we do it? Find a reporter, right? It can be somebody very fresh, right? So you don't have to pay somebody not based in Delhi, Bombay. So again, you don't have to pay a lot, right? Somebody B class cities, C class cities, whatever. That's where the stories are. Stories are not in Delhi. All you're doing in Delhi is cover events and press conferences, right? So if the government, so as now another thing that came up was like, oh, people used to tell me like, why don't you get accredited with the government? So I think why? Well, then you can go to the government press conferences. So government has already a way to communicate their stories, right? I rather take what they're saying and go in the other direction, right? So the good example of peace sign up, if he had believed government data, right? Like, oh, there's no famine, everything, he wouldn't have gone to Kalahandi and report, do that, right? And it's simple. Again, just go in the other direction. Actually, I used to travel without an agenda, like what I'm covering. We'll just go and talk to people and be observant, be present, and just talk to people, and they will tell you the stories, right? India is full of stories. All you have to be receptive and not go with a preconceived notion like, oh, this is the only thing we want to do. Simple thing we used to do is just go to any place, go find the oldest mosque. I will say, hey, kaun si masjid sabse purani hai yahan pe? And they will just go and pray there and just talk to people there. That's it. And the stories will come to you. People, and it's maybe the problem of all the journalism schools. Because, it was all those professors, now except you're pretty young, but the older professors, they grew up in the golden era of journalism, right? Print journalism was famous, and they're still holding on to that. I understand writing is sometimes better for ideas and stuff like that, but your audience have moved on, right? How many people are still reading newspapers, right? The newspapers have to evolve, the magazines have to evolve, and the way of storytelling is important. I don't think journalism is dead. There is always need for journalism, especially now we see AI taking over, and there need to be discussions about it. Like, what is the truth? What is the story? Who gets to tell the story is what has been discussed for a long time. But now, since AI is in the mix, they can write the whole article. But what is missing from them? So I think going back to the roots, going back to people and telling that story, I think is still very powerful. I think the pictures are still going to be powerful. I believe the videos are going to be powerful, even though fake videos are there. So then, how the new media will emerge? I think it will go back to credibility of the organization, right? So not like, oh, there's a video, because people will get so fed up with the random videos showing up and where you don't know who created it and what is the agenda. So I think the credibility of journalists who are saying it, people will trust, like Mohammed Riaz, and say, okay, whatever he puts out, I can believe that, right? So then the responsibility on you to do fact checking before publishing it, right? So um, the other thing was, when we say about Muslim media organization, and I said we are not a religious organization, we don't cover, but we are rooted in that environment, in that culture, in that ethos, right? So the discussion about Islamic art comes up, like what is Islamic art, right? You see it behind me, and you can recognize, okay, this is Islamic art or not, right? I don't have to define it, but there are core elements that defines it. So actually, being Muslim, right? In the Quran, there's a verse like, don't communicate unless you have verified the authenticity of that. So that was also core for us as well. We weren't chasing the stories because it was the latest thing or the biggest thing. And I can tell you, there are some stories I have killed, not a whole lot, but where I couldn't verify it. So, for example, somebody said, a reporter actually said, oh, yeah, somebody said there are a lot of people killed here. There are dead bodies on the street. So I was like, okay, no, I cannot publish it until I verify it from another independent source, right? So those things are important. As a Muslim, as a journalist, it's common sense. But now what happens that somebody gets a video, they forward it to everybody, they put it on their Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and it's like crazy. So I think people who hold back now, the organization hold back and verify. Sometimes it was slow for us as well, like breaking news and something comes up. I say, no, 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 we have to verify, we have to check, we have to tell a story instead of just rushing over this. Also, the other thing I hate is the two things I hate about journalism: breaking news and exclusive. Everything has to be exclusive. Like, why are you reporting that everybody else is reporting? Like, what's the point? And then breaking news. No, come on. There's nothing breaking news. So anyway, um, so so yeah, so be mindful. I think, and I think I'm very excited about that, and I think there's need to be more discussion about what the new media looks like, right? So reporting that, covering that, I think will be interesting.
You mentioned about how new media should be, and if I may say that in India, in last couple of years, and of course internationally as well, like say organization like Article 14, India has spent,
Yeah,
the News Minute, or video focused only, say the Brute India, for example, or Wire, Scroll, host of other media. Quint is doing quite interesting stuff online. So
yeah.
there are these new media which started in last 1 decade and which have adapted. If I could talk few things specific about TCN. So do you think that although TCN was pioneer for the digital first media, but TCN couldn't itself adapt to new technologies. For example, we with Zoom and Google Meet, one can have panel discussions or several other things which you because of lack of budget probably, but you feel, would you agree that TCN failed to adapt to the new
No, so
technologies?
no, we did not. We adopted technology a lot, but I was always, I still have a negative opinion about these opinion pieces, panel discussion. I hate it. I hate it. So that's one reason. We could have done it, but I was not interested in that. The second aspect of that is the video. The video I missed out, and also social media I missed out. There's a reason for that, because my time was limited, right? It was easier for me to read a text versus watch a video. So I kind of missed out on that. In fact, somebody said, sent a video, and then we created a YouTube channel, and we started putting some videos there, and then realized that, oh my God, there's like so much demand there. So we shifted the resources, and you see we made pretty good documentaries and stuff, and the video. But again, just because I didn't have time, right? I had to edit, and I didn't edit. I put the whole thing there, an hour long interview or something like that, because just we were under resourced, so we didn't make it like 30-second video like Brood does, and things like that. So I don't think we didn't adapt to technology. It's just that because again, my personality was drawing the organization, and I was constrained by that because sometime I'm looking at the video. It's just it takes, it requires undivided attention, versus I can skim through an article quickly and get a gist of it and like, okay, yeah, this looks good. So
Has
that's
it
the
also
other.
been a challenge to get trained people? Sorry, I'm cutting you in because I know
No, no,
you also have
yeah,
a.
yeah. We'll come back to your question, but I think the social media is another thing that I missed. The Facebook thing, I didn't realize it how big the social media. So that I will admit that I totally missed out. I didn't know, I didn't realize how much traffic is going to be driven through Facebook. There also the way Facebook worked, and I was not happy with that because we're a nonprofit, right? If I send you to do the reporting, that means I'm spending money. And the Facebook wanted us to spend money to advertise it in front of people. It's like, okay, first I spend money to bring this unique reporting, and then I have to spend money in front of people, right? So I was just like, this model didn't work. So I think social media also driven a lot of traffic, and people were pumping money to put it in front of the eyeballs. And the other thing I realized that people see what they see, right? So if they're not going out of the way to kind of, whatever is fed to them. So that's the thing. What was the question? The third one, that train people.
So
Yeah. So
I wanted to ask that you said it's not Islamic website and you wanted to focus on community, but
yeah.
somehow TCN was also stereotyped, and probably that was that has that been a challenge that you were not able to find, say, good professionals who to work with you? Like there have been might probably few exceptions, but people who you might have wanted, like the more, say, tech savvy people or more trained professionals to make the organization, to help the organization?
No, so two aspects of that. We always wanted people who are don't have journalism background. What I was always looking for, passionate people, passionate about the community, about the reporting and all that. I think the work of TCN was so they were not trained, and I purposely wanted people that I can train, so that they're not thinking that this is how journalism should be done. Rather, like I can train them and look for story ideas. I think that's a lot of journalists still struggle with finding good stories, which is my strength. I always believe any journalist should have 10 story ideas at any given time, and two of them he or she will be actively working, and three is just like back burner. They always like collecting information. And I don't know why it's so complicated for people struggle with that. Anyway, the second aspect of that, so two, as yeah, so I train them. Second, since they're not trained, it's easy to don't have to pay a lot much money, because if they come trained, I don't have money for that. But in your aspect, you're saying that whether TCN was stereotype. I think TCN was probably only a Muslim organization where we have a lot of. When I say a lot, some. I mean, we were always sparse, so some good non-Muslim reporters come and join us. And it was not because we were doing community media, but we're doing innovative things. They knew there was a freedom was there, right? So Nivedita, you work with her. She's now covering things, environmental beat, but she worked, and again, she quit Hindustan Times and say, okay, I want to do this, and she kind of reached out, and I gave Siddhant Mohan is another one. Now he's very famous on Little and Top, right? So he came and he did his reporting. So I don't think there was a stereotype like, oh, this is a Muslim publication, we shouldn't go there. So that's a strength. The other thing was also, yeah, these people are,
But
some of
probably
them
some
were.
Muslim journalists were scared, like young Muslims I spoke to, when in they were like, okay, if they work in TCN, they're not sure if they will be, like, this fear has been there among young Muslims, some young journalists actually
Well,
earlier.
yeah, no. I think what happened when we started it, initially established Muslim journalists who, yeah, again, these are people who kind of grew up in a different environment. They were very, so these are Muslim journalists. And I noticed that, again, I can tell honestly about this, like they were assigned Muslim stories, right? And they hated it because the challenge at that time, early 2000, was like, oh, I'm secular, right? I don't want to do Muslim stories. But their editor was like, you are the only one who knows this. But I realized that there were two things. One, they hated doing those assignments, right? So the reporting was not very good, and they don't want to do that. Second is also I realized that they were not deep study of the community. They were very shallow because all of us have constraint, right? I grew up in Bihar, and if I'm sent to Kerala, say report on Muslims there, it's not the same thing, right? So I have to be mindful of that. So I think they were not willing to spend time to learn about the community there, or the Muslim, their diversity within the organization. For example, one easy thing is, Barelvis are always considered Sufis, right? As like Sufi Barelvi, right? Versus fanatic. And this, I caught Muslim journalists, big name, Delhi-based journalists doing that. I just like simply said in an email privately, not on Twitter, trying to shame that person. I was like, this is not correct. Like everybody is Sufi, even the Ahl Hadith come from a Sufi Naqshbandi background, right? So it's just like, why are perpetuating something, right? It just tells me that you're being lazy or you don't know yourself about the community. So that's why another reason for me to bring non-trained people is like I can tell them about these things because I spend a lot of time reading about it. So that's that. What was the other thing that you asked about?
About journalist only, I asked. Another question, like there are few other experiments which TCN did and which others, is just not my question, by the way. It's some of the questions, this is what I have heard from some well-wishers of TCN, that, for example, TCN started Hindi, and not Urdu or any other language.
Yeah,
I understand the reason. It started when I was also working with TCN.
yeah,
So you wanted to probably reach to the larger audience in North. So
yeah.
if you could say something about that, and also simultaneously, like TCN also around the same time thought of expanding beyond Indian Muslims and trying to target Dalit and other marginalized communities,
Right,
which
right.
many felt, and at the hindsight, when I also look back, I feel that because we had, or TCN had budget constraint, somewhere things got diluted. What do you have to like? What is
Yeah,
your
yeah. No,
take on?
I completely agree with that assessment that we got to stretch thin and we couldn't do things effectively. So yeah, Urdu, I never wanted to do Urdu. The reason for that, even starting TCN, I don't want to duplicate some effort that's going on. Again, Urdu newspapers get a lot of negative analysis, but they are doing an amazing job. They are connected to the community. They have reporters in small districts, and they're doing wonderful job. Somebody pays attention to exactly good things that's happening, and they should. I don't know. There's not enough coverage of the important work they are doing, right? So, of course, there are negative things about that, but I think I look at the positives. So I don't want to duplicate the wonderful work they're doing, right? The second thing is I wanted our stories to go to a larger audience. The world should know about it. Why should I write and read कि मेरा ये था कि हमारी कहानी हम ही कहें, हम ही सुने, हम ही रोएं? No, I want the world to know. So that's another reason for English. And then, Urdu also limits you geographically. As I said, we had reporters in Assam, Kashmir, and Kerala. How are we going to connect and talk to each other, right? If it's not in English, it's a lingua language. So that was the reason for doing that. Regarding Hindi, yeah, so I realized that Hindi newspapers are terrible in covering Muslim stories. And I realized again that the growth of BJP or Hindutva elements happening in Hindi space. And again, the reason TCN was started because we didn't have Muslim-owned English newspaper. So I thought we can do that. I thought also that we will get resources to support it, but community didn't support it as much. They didn't see the need. So yes, the stress thing, resources were stressed in, so we couldn't do effectively English and also effectively in the also doing on that. Regarding Dalits and travel stories, that was also a learning experience for me as well. So we started a Muslim thing, but I realized that it's not just about the Muslims. The system itself is discriminatory, so against Dalits. And I realized that the coverage of Dalit is exactly how they were covering Muslim, always in negative. And even now, if you look and search for stories like, oh, Dalit has been lynched, शादी पे जा रहा था उसके बारात पे वो उसको नहीं चढ़ने दिया or Dalit woman has been raped. I'm not saying these things are not happening. These are things that are happening. What else is going on in the Dalit community, right? You cannot just cover negative stories and think, I've covered the community, right? So that's how we started kind of thinking about it, because it was a sense of responsibility, right? I cannot, as a good Muslim, also just talk about myself. I have to talk about zulm jahan ho raha hai. We have to document that. So that that's how we took it up. It wasn't like some political agenda, not at all. But I think after we did that, Muslims also got awareness. There's a lot of Jamaat Ulama Hind started doing that. I think Asad Owaisi also started. Maybe that wasn't the environment everybody kind of picked it up. Adivasis also, I feel very strongly about that. And same thing, Dalit coverage. Adivasi, even the negative coverage is not happening. It's just that nothing is happening at all. And Adivasis are even more fragmented and it's harder to report on them. And now there's a tribal army and stuff like that. But I think there need to be more resources there. And I wish,
But but
they
one
would
may
pick.
say that there was Dalit Camera and National Dastak, and now there is Mook Naik.
Yeah,
So there
they
were these kind of portals
did.
or
Yeah.
media who were like Dalit led in a way. So
Mm.
in what way you feel TCN would have been or was doing it differently when they were especially approaching stories related to Dalits or Adivasis?
No, National Dastak, I'm not familiar. I don't know when they started it. Dalit Camera started late. Mugnaik is, I think few
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
Again,
quite.
they're doing good work. Actually, some of the Muslim journalists working for Mugnaik now, so more on field reporting and things like that. So I think, and Mugnaik,
She also
she
started, I think, she worked with TCN
worked at
before.
TCN for a while, yeah, after leaving BBC. So, and Dalit Camera, I forgot his name. He was also with TCN. So actually, yeah, that I did talk about it. A lot of Dalit journalists also. So we hired them from the community. So we were trying to replicate the same model, right? Instead of Muslim telling Dalit story, I wanted to just kind of provide a platform. But yes, you're absolutely right. I think we didn't have the resources, so we got to stretch pretty thin, and we couldn't do anything effectively. But it was a fun ride doing that.
It's almost 2 decades, like it's 18 years since yeah, TCN. Looking back, do you feel that you could have done it somewhere little differently, or like you are generally you feel that you did what you could do?
If I have to do it again, I wouldn't do it. Because like अंग्रेजी में कहावत है, angels, sorry, क्या कहते हैं उसको, fools go where angels fear to tread. So I was foolish. Even the thinking about it, India is such a huge country with such diversity, I can actually cover it at all, right? So we didn't think about it. I didn't think it through. But what motivated me was, and again, the media is in a bad shape, right? But I came to America in '90s, so print journalism was still happening, was pretty thriving. In small communities, I would say 2, 3 newspapers, right? So it's like, यहाँ पे इतनी छोटी community में they have newspapers. Muslim, Indian Muslim, again, I was thinking as a one community, like 250 million or whatever. They don't have a one English newspaper. So that was what started this whole thing. If I have to do things differently, again, I don't think I'll be able to do it because it's just the challenge, the enormity of the problem is huge. So what I will do instead, if somebody's thinking about, is that keep it niche and niche, right? Like for example, somebody's doing from a Simanchal area, right? My
My
media.
media, yes.
So I think that will work better. Keep it local, and having local is two things, right? Which is the community knows you well. So first of all, accountability is there. Second is that hopefully you will find support from within the community to make it run. So I still believe the community aspect of it is important, because not just for fundraising but also accountability. Because when I used to raise fund, I'll stand in front of the community and like, okay, this is what work I have done. Because right now, if the funding is coming from advertisers or grants, right, organization, you're responsible, you're accountable to them instead of the community. So I still believe, I know it's hard, and this, you're not going journalism to make money, right? So you have to be honest
I
about it.
actually wanted to ask you about this model. You said media cannot be for profit; it has to be non-profit. And so, but you have experienced it. We all know this. Raising fund for media, especially, although now in 2 decades awareness is slightly more, but it's not easy task. And if someone funds you, they would again want to dictate terms. So, which model do you think, like, what can be from your experience, what can be a possible model for a community media, like, I mean, the financial model?
Yeah, so absolutely. Raising fund is a full-time job. It's hard, right? Because, yeah. So what model I think we worked on, but I couldn't expand it too much because, again, I started losing interest, was having 100 people from the community who understand the vision of this. So again, put a cap on it कि भाई आप 1,000 रुपए देंगे महीने का साल का जो भी है, right? So there's a limit to that. So you don't have one person dictating everything, right? And then make it a panel. So 100 log hai, 1,000, whatever you're like 10,000 a year or something, and then you have 1 lakh rupees. And again, keep it small and scale. Don't think of like having a big office. What is the need for office? But having the resources and ability to do that. So having a strong base of support is important. You cannot do crowdfunding because people don't. People got used to getting free news. So 10 rupees, 5 rupees bhi people don't give. So I know that I've tried and it doesn't work. So I think having a small group of people who kind of understand the vision you're selling. Again, you will have problem. Again, if you're doing honest reporting, people say, oh, yeah, ye story kyun kiya, ye story kyun nahi kiya, and all this, why did you do that? So don't sell them on the story, but sell them that this is the vision, this is what I want to do. And, there will be stories that you agree with, there will be stories we'll do that you will not agree with, and that's okay. But as long as you think this is important, this need to be done. And then again, meet with them on a maybe quarterly basis or annual basis, like, okay, based on your funding, your support, we have done this XYZ. You think we should continue to exist? I think another question I used to ask in our board meeting is like, not all organizations need to continue for 100 years, and it's fine to shut down. So I was like, always used to ask, like, has TCN served its purpose? Should we shut it down? because the change environment is changing, right? So I think that's a question that organizations need to ask. Like all, not organizations need to continue there. So once you have served your purpose, or you're not able to become effective, maybe it's fine. Because again, you got to be really responsible with the community money, right? It's a trust, right? Somebody has given you that, so you have to utilize it properly. And when you think you cannot, you should just step aside.
Okay, so that's about model. Post 14, especially in the Indian context, we have seen there is lot of there is mushrooming of a lot of community media, some hyper local, some at national level, some both national and regional. But there is scope of lot of community media. So based on your experience, like how do you see these community media, their role, uh, uh, vis-a-vis, if you can compare it with TCN? And from there, my last question probably would be is that what lessons you have for those community medias?
Yeah, I mean, lessons are simple, which is be attached to the community. Don't think that you know all the answers. I think it's important to talk to people. It's also not fair to compare what's happening now with what TCN did. I think it was a different time period, different environment. I think the hyper local or localized coverage is important. I think they also need to kind of experiment new things, what's working, what's not working, but have the core belief that why you're doing it. Don't always be chasing the numbers, right? So, for example, for us, and again, I think being nonprofit helped us. Like, if the story was important, and I know only 10 people are going to read it, it doesn't matter. Story is important because we were also documenting it for posterity, right? So it's like 10 saal baad, 20 years later, somebody is going to read this thing again because things don't go away in internet, right? So somebody will write about it. They need a reference to an incident that happened. Suppose, somebody doing a PhD on Forbes guy. So our pieces that Mumtaz did was going to be very useful. And we got picked up by actually a lot of references in a lot of books by academics, which is great. So that's the service that we are providing as a community, a perpetual, right? So even if TCN shuts down tomorrow, things are available, archive.org or other places. So those things are important. So I think people have to be honest on why they're doing it and find your own support base and do it. And you don't have to chase what others are doing, define it yourself. If we had, again, that time where complete newspaper, Times of India, things like that, we would not have achieved it. So innovate, do it yourself. What makes sense to you, and given the resources, and innovate again. You don't have the overhead of all these things of news desk and big offices. So be playful as well. Enjoy doing it. If you don't enjoy doing it, then don't do it. I mean, that's why I step aside, because it became a chore. It wasn't an enjoyable experience anymore. So that's one reason to stop.
Uh, I sort of I have exhausted my question, but if there is something you would like to add, I would be.
um, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but I think it was a good conversation to have. But I would like to know from your perspective, because, obviously, from people who are working, and you, again, as you said, you have insider, outside experience. I still remember first time meeting you in Delhi, I think India Islamic Cultural Center, and then you joined after that. So your perception of working within the organization, and then how you're becoming, a journalism professor. So I think that's what the purpose of this call was, to kind of write, um, from a media perspective, what we got right, what we got wrong, and I want people to be honest about it. It was an experiment, and we did it. I'm proud of what I did, but also there are, of course, as I said, my blind side, right? For example, the video, I didn't pick it up early on. Social media, I still hate it, but those are important elements that were driving traffic. So I want people to kind of see it that way, because other journalists, even other academics, have um, interviewed me, they just kind of, I feel like, scratching the surface, right? And not really going deep on the technical side of things, on the innovative side of things. The third thing, we didn't talk too much about it, is also how to cover Muslim stories. I think maybe we should set up a different we talked a little bit about that, like not covering Muslim as a
Yes, that's
stereotype. But what does that mean, right? So I think maybe we can have another half an hour session on just that. In what questions came up and how did we tackle that, right? So if we're saying, okay, we're taking Muslim as a social community or a cultural community, what does that mean? How do we still cover the religious aspect of it? Those may be batein ho sakti hain. I think it will be fun as well.